Join the coven. The Black Cloud. A story written by nmwrites. Did you know that in 1911, wolves killed a wedding party of 118 people in Russia? The New York Times described the survivors seeing a black cloud moving rapidly towards them across the snowfield. A pack of hundreds of starving wolves that slaughtered them while they traveled to what was supposed to be a celebratory banquet. I've been thinking about that story a lot lately. I won't say where I am. The government is probably looking for leaks, and I need this warning to stay up for as long as possible. This information is too important to keep hidden. Animals had been acting strangely for a while, skittish, like something had spooked them. The neighbors in our little rural village complained about strange lights in the night. We all had ideas, the kind of idle chit-chat we are really good at. The winter had been too warm. Maybe there were crews looking to build that factory in the next town. Probably teenagers with those damn fireworks, drinking beer, and, well, being stupid. The night it happened was a full moon. I remember walking home from visiting a friend earlier in the evening and being amazed at how well lit everything was in the moonlight. I was too far from the first attack to hear the screams, but the news the next day shocked me. Wolves had attacked a campsite nearby. 15 people had been killed and another 8 injured. While this wasn't unheard of, the loss of life was extreme. We were all shocked by it. However, there weren't more attacks. People healed, and we mourned and moved on. The second month was much worse. My neighbor's cousin had moved in after the attack so he could recuperate, and the neighbor had complained to no end about the inconvenience, by which he meant he couldn't hit his wife when he had a relative staying at his house. I heard his screams when it started. I remember looking at the window and seeing a giant wolf chasing him out of his house and being frozen by the sight. It was too large, unnatural, deadly. I locked myself in the basement for the night and prayed for the morning. Sunrise only brought awful news and heartbreak. Our village was not large, and the 55 deaths shook it. Another 37 people were injured, and no one could explain how a pack of large wolves had descended across such a distance without being noticed, nor how so many of them have gotten into people's houses. I began to hear dark whispers, rumors that the survivors had been touched with some dark curse, that they were to blame for this. For the next month, it seemed like we sat on a powder keg, the whole community counting down the days until the next full moon. I'm not sure how many people were killed that night. I know that the soldiers arrived the next morning, and we were told that we were being relocated to a small city close by, where we would be protected. Just a temporary safety measure, while the government killed an especially violent pack of wolves. After arriving in the city and being inspected for wounds by an army medic, we wound up in makeshift shelters. Villages throughout the surrounding area had been emptied into the city, and anyone who had been bitten by a wolf was moved to a special quarantine at some camp outside the city. I never saw any of those people again, but I assume they're now dead. I spent a long day in line waiting for an examination. Another day spent in line waiting for my allowance cards for food and water. The third day, I had queued up for temporary housing and made a comment without thinking about how I'd still be in line when the next full moon rolled around. I've always been like that, prone to making comments without thinking. My last relationship ended when my girlfriend asked if I ever thought about getting married, and I said no. The guard, who heard me, yanked me out of line just as an old university classmate recognized me while walking by. Turns out he had an empty apartment I could use that was already furnished. For once, my mouth had worked in my favor. I glanced with glee as I walked away from the swirling, serpentine line of people waiting for housing. The entire thing was a giant, hectic mess. Mistakes were made. Mistakes were always made. The atmosphere in the city was chaotic. The local priests began to warn about how we were being punished by the gods. They stood in front of churches and shouted that salvation lay within, that they offered the only protection from God's wrath. Soldiers with rifles stood on every corner. Again, the countdown to the full moon set everyone on edge. One of the largest churches announced it would serve as a sanctuary, locking their doors to protect the flock within. I turned in early that night and barricaded the door. I don't know how many people in that church have been bitten. I don't know what it must have been like when they turned, when the crowd realized they were locked in with them. I do remember the screams and the sirens outside. I remember explosions and gunfire in the distance. I remember the next morning too, with all inhabitants ordered to appear for inspection. Watching those who had been bitten being taken away. And the morning after that, when the soldiers were gone, we were told that they had built fortifications around the entire area, a barricade to keep this problem in. I heard they shot anyone approaching it. We were alone now, and there were other dangers besides the wolves. A group of hard men announced that they had formed a local protection squad. They searched homes for people who had been bitten and were being sheltered by protective families. They beat those who they thought were hiding from them and collected weapons and food for distribution. They were a hard-drinking, violent bunch, and a citizenry used to be tough rule buckled quickly. They hung those who they suspected of having been bitten throughout the city as a public show of how they would protect us. The internet had been blocked since we moved here, and every day I watched the news in a vain hope that our situation had been noticed by the outside world. Stuck in a city not my own, caught between a malicious ruling class and a pack of supernatural wolves, I prayed for deliverance. On the night of the next full moon, we were ordered into our homes at 3 p.m., long before sundown. I heard that the protection squad had found a bunker they were safe in. Someone said only the two titular leaders, Anton and Xander, had keys. I heard they locked themselves and their goons underground and waited for morning. The wolves streamed into the city like an oil slick cuts through water, a line of darkness that you know will remain long after it appears to dissipate. Those who were living in less secure homes met a quick fate, and I watched from above and cried, I prayed for deliverance from my brutal reality. The protection squad inspected us again the next day, and again the day after that. Now they would stop people in the streets and order them to disrobe. You can imagine the liberties they took. The bite victims who they hung seemed to include a disproportionate amount of their detractors. But I said nothing. In truth, I was terrified. I prayed every night for a sliver of hope. It didn't come. It was almost 4 weeks later when I rounded a corner and watched Anton beating a man. "What are you doing?" The words had escaped my mouth before I realized I was speaking. The scene in front of me was clear. I saw the woman crying, the man, her father, standing between her and Anton, bleeding. Anton paced over to me and placed a hand on my shoulder. "This doesn't concern you. Carry on, friend." I looked at the pleading eyes of the man and looked at my feet. My words cut off as his fist hit my stomach. "Didn't I tell you to carry on?" he snarled as he circled me, looking for an opening to exact more violence as I tried to curl into a ball. He kicked my side, then my head. I heard a scream as the man threw himself onto Anton's back. I heard shouts and footsteps. A crowd surrounded Anton, holding him back from attacking the man. Then laughter. Anton announced he was ready for his prize fight against the wolves. The crowd dispersed quickly, leaving us alone. The man and his daughter shuffled past me. "Thank you," he whispered as he went by. I clenched my eyes shut until I was sure I was alone. I waited for the pain in my body to subside. Minutes passed. Finally, I opened my eyes. There on the ground in front of me laid a key. It was days before I slipped through the city to the site of the bunker where Anton and his men would take refuge. I tested the heavy door of the bunker and found it locked. I looked around, finding myself still alone. I pulled the key from my pocket and inserted it into the lock. It turned. Relocking the door, I hid the key away and hurried back to my apartment to think. We were all ordered to our homes at 3 p.m. again the day of the full moon, and I thought out my strategy. The plan was flawed in 100 ways, and I could not fathom how it ended if not in my death. I watched the streets empty, first of citizens, then finally of the protection squad, searching for stragglers. The sun grew lower in the sky as I changed into a pair of dark clothes and grabbed a hammer. At dusk, I slipped through the door to my building and began my journey. I slinked through the empty streets, hearing the distant howls begin. My plan was simple: unlock the door, destroy the lock with the hammer, and run back to my apartment before the wolves got me, while stranding the evil men in the bunker without a safe haven. It was a dumb idea. The light dropped out of the city quickly. Few streetlights still came on, and all of the buildings appeared lifeless, though I knew they teemed with life, hidden behind boards and crouched under beds. I arrived at the bunker and smiled. I had made it. I walked towards the door when a sound made me turn. A wolf stood behind me. The beast was giant. I have seen a mastiff once before, and this creature was at least twice its size. I clutched the hammer in my hand, trying to decide if I could fight it off, when I saw another behind it, then another. A tear ran down my cheek. and I dropped the hammer. I would not survive this night. There are bad men in there. Again, the words poured from my mouth before I realized I was speaking. The wolf stared at me. In the bunker. I came to unlock the door, I continued. You can eat me. Just let me unlock the door. In that moment, the wolf inclined its head ever so slightly. I took a step backwards, and then another. Moving slowly, I pulled the key from my pocket and inserted it into the lock. I turned it and opened the door, stepping to the side as I did so. I felt a breeze as the large animals flew through the door into the bunker, and I heard the confused screams from within. I waited until the wolves poured back out of the bunker, away from me, and left the city. I walked back to my apartment, unharmed, and spent the night staring at the ceiling. In the morning, I walked out of the city. I heard bits of confused conversation, and knew I had hours before anyone tried to exert control. I walked into the woods and kept walking, picking up bits of trail here and there. I slept under the stars and walked further the next day, finally coming to a small camp that night. The people who greeted me were friendly and warm. They explained the changes they suffered through, how they were trying to control their hunger, to harness it. They did not wish to harm the innocent, and in me, they finally found an ally who might understand. I'm writing this from a small government office in the Western Barricade. There are 4 of us inside now, posing as soldiers. There have been enough reinforcements that no one knows who exactly is supposed to be here and who isn't. The next full moon is in 3 days. When the 3 men with me turn the guards, we'll be distracted. I'll open the doors for the rest of the pack, and we'll be through the barricade. The priest said the wolves were a punishment from God, and now I realize he was right. They're a way to punish the evil in the world, to wipe away the unjust. We are building something beautiful. After this full moon, we'll be free, and then, maybe, we'll be at your home for the next one. There is a lot of evil in the world, and the pack is hungry.